Hello, hello, and welcome to Fine, I'll Talk About It, the podcast where we say the quiet parts out loud. Real talk, straight to the point, no fake positivity. I'm your host, Danielle Young, and today I'm joined by Josh Cook. Josh is a peer support specialist, prison in-reach specialist, a certified life coach, advocate, facilitator, and sometimes public speaker. And on today's episode, we are talking about the stigmas, the impact of harm reduction surrounding convicted felons, and why it matters today. Josh, welcome to Fine, I'll Talk About It.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and why this subject matters?
My story includes the why it matters. I spent some time in prison when I was 19 to 27. While being incarcerated, I sort of learned, that it's just a warehouse and it's sort of creating more problems than it's solving. And I was, heavily impacted by the whole process. Of course, I mean, I think anybody would be. Um, Now that I'm older and I've been in advocacy and I've been in different organizations working towards creating kind of a safer environment for everybody, including people that have come out of prison, I just recognize the importance of creating a system that doesn't just create punitive, um, processes, but also tries to find a way to bring people back into the fold and create a pathway for people to become, an actual productive member of their community and their society.
Got it. And how old were you when you went to prison?
I was 19 years old,
Okay. And then you were 6 years?
7.5. In,
7.5.
yeah, in
Okay.
Oregon, we have a mandatory minimum sentencing guideline. So I fell under the 90-month sentencing guideline.
Got it. Okay. And then when you got out of prison, what was that like for you at that point?
Uh, well, since this was between the years 2000, 2007, there was a big sort of technological kind of culture shock. Before going in, I think I'd seen maybe 3 cell phones in my life, and then coming out, everybody was on a cell phone. So there was not like no real preparation for this sort of online all the time accessibility when previously, like, if you know what I'm talking about, you just didn't have this
Yeah.
continued connectivity that way. And I remember feeling like, I remember feeling really confused by that because it was interesting that I'd see all these people standing on the corner and they were all next to each other, but they were all on their phones. So they were, miles away. And, coming out of a system that you didn't really, you know, you were always with people, you're always talking with people. That was like your only way of connecting was face to face for the most part. That was a real interesting juxtaposition. I felt really isolated immediately. Beyond that, the biggest sort of impact I faced was just recognizing how much harder it was going to be for me to find work, to find housing, find a way to just become part of things. I had a lot of fees immediately. I had a lot of requirements, which, that's all fine. But there wasn't any real support around me obtaining the money to pay those fees
Mhm.
there was organizations, but not real support, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
and I think for the most part, though, I had built something of a community with the organization I had been doing work with. So immediately I got to work with them. So it felt like I already had kind of a bridge there. I had met people that were coming into the prison that were helping teach and train and organize. And it was through that I recognized how impactful that portion was. I could, even if I had been helped getting a job or helped getting an apartment or whatever that looked like, the part that I saw that I needed and everybody I interacted with needed was this community bridge, like the knowing that there were people that have never been to prison, that didn't know anything about it, that were supporting me as a human. And it was definitely, that sort of allowed me to see, if people didn't have that, they didn't have anything really. They just were hopefully family, maybe if that was a thing, maybe church, but it was you're released, figure it out. And I think that was really eye opening. I had, of course, been working with them before release. This organization's Phoenix Rising Transitions organization. So I didn't really understand how that was going to look when I got out until of course I was released. and then seeing other people in these different classes I had to take that didn't have that support system, and how, you know, they were basically in prison out on the street. You know, their mentality was the same, their culture was the same, their um, social distancing was the same. Um, so yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot to take in, a lot to navigate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you're in prison for 7 years, and like you said, we had this technological boom, cell phones and internet was exploding, and then you really didn't have anybody basically holding your hand and saying, okay, this is how you reintroduce into society.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, I think more importantly, we don't have a rehabilitation system set up at all. Everything that I learned or was able to experience that was beneficial for me came in the form of someone volunteering their time to come in and provide that. There was no, I think it's a lot of that's changed now and it's slowly changing, but there was no real support around trades. There was no support around employment. There was no support inside around even really mental health, which you know, I get, I guess on like a societal level, we don't want to, um, uh, you know, make it too easy to be in prison. But at the same time, like most everybody in there is going to be out eventually. And it just seemed really odd to me that we supported this idea that we should make their life hell and then hope they aren't terrible when they get out. And that to me just seemed really backwards. And I saw that, you know, I saw that firsthand. I saw people come and go. My 7.5 years, I saw one guy come and go 4 times. And, you know,
Wow.
there's no incentive for him to provide, to learn, to educate, to, you know, I happened to do that because I didn't come, I think, from a criminal background. As a very scrawny kid when I went in there. I was terrified of the whole experience, and I didn't want to go back. So I forced that around me. You know, I sought this stuff and I interacted with it. But if you didn't choose to do that, then, you know, there was no push for that. You could just do your
Yeah.
time and leave and be exactly or worse than you were when you went in.
Yeah. Well, which would explain why the rate of recidivism is so high.
It's
You know,
really
you don't,
high.
yeah, you don't have those people that are on the outside saying, okay, you've now done your time and we're going to help you reintegrate and we're going to help you find a support system. And like, there's none of that. So,
Yeah.
you know, what do you suggest that we start doing as far as helping those people who are transitioning from prison to the outside world?
Well, and that's the real challenging part, right? Because I mean, that's kind of where this harm reduction idea comes in. I know harm reduction mostly reflects around mental health and addiction, but I think it's applicable to most anything. Harm reduction is this idea that you just always remember the human. You just remember that some, excuse me, you just
Yeah.
remember that somebody coming over, struggling with drug addiction is also someone's brother, son, father, etc., and that they should still
Yeah.
have access to things. They should still have access to some basic human services like food and clothes. Like we shouldn't treat people inhumanely and then expect them to find their own humanity. Because it's all very social. All this stuff is very, very social. And if we remove that element and just say, well, you're not a part of this until you perform perfectly, you know, it makes it harder for people to ever get out of that. And when we look at harm reduction as a concept of, you know, just remembering the humanity of people, it can be a great start, right? That doesn't mean that everybody who went to prison is a good person and is going to end up a good person, but it does mean that like we have to consider the possibility that the reasons they're there are because their caregivers were shitty, their life experiences were shitty, they didn't know any better, and when they come out, that they don't want to go back. Like that's the goal. And if we're constantly looking at and treating somebody as if they are still this person that's in prison, we're not giving them the opportunity to be human again. We aren't giving them the opportunity to become a part of things. So I think that's the start, right? It's just recognizing we're all figuring this stuff out the best we can, and some of us make some terrible mistakes along the way. Some of
Yeah.
us make terrible mistakes and don't get caught, and somehow that makes it better. And some of us never make mistakes at all, and that's all great. But at some point, we have to be able to start remembering that everybody's a human being. And we look at places
Yeah.
like Norway. Norway's a big one. We had folks from our prison system go to Norway to kind of learn from them because their recidivism was extremely low. But if you look at
Mm.
their prison sort of structure, they basically have an apartment when they're there. They have like all the amenities. They have classes. They have therapy. They have support around finding work. They have trade programs. They have all this stuff, and it's kind of like almost a college campus. There's not there's not a lot of like lockdown to it. And of course, people hear like, "Oh, that's bullshit. They're getting rewarded for being in prison." But
Yeah.
meanwhile, they get out and they don't go back. And the key component that they found was community support. Most societies are rated on how they treat their most vulnerable and their most struggling, right? And their theory, which seems to be consistently working, is if somebody's struggling with something like addiction, some sort of a social issue, then it's not just their fault. It's we failed somehow too. Like how do we fix this? How do we all fix this? And it works. Their system works.
Yeah.
Like I said, they have a lower recidivism. They have a higher rate of people getting out and staying successful, whatever that looks like for them. And there's a lot to learn there. That doesn't mean, again, we should just accept everybody in the fold. And I think that's where harm reduction can be negatively impactful. There's just some stuff I don't think we should just, turn that blind eye towards. And, if you start looking at, serial killers, and that's where the detractors come in. Like, somehow it all gets pulled together. Like, I am not on the same page as somebody who killed babies. I'm not.
Right.
We're not. That's a different thing. Or so, a serial child rapist. Like, clearly, there's something legitimately broken there that scientifically doesn't seem like can be fixed. Right. So we have to take stock of our current situation before we can make real big changes, and that includes recognizing that some people are just really awful, and that they don't necessarily deserve that same bringing back into the fold. There's nuance to it, and especially since you look at the type of crimes that people commit in Norway, their violent crimes are lower, their sexual crimes are lower than us. Um, Crimes against children are lower. So, of course, their program of bringing people back in the fold seems a little easier. They don't have the same pool of people. But then the question now becomes, what are we doing wrong that that's the case? What are we doing wrong that we have such a high level of this kind of crime happening, this kind of harm happening that like even we just shouldn't, try to community rehabilitate, I guess, is the thing. Not that they should
Yeah.
have access to rehabilitation stuff. I think everybody should, because I again want everybody safe, but it's just a different creature. There's just something there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we live in a country that doesn't value mental health care. That's the first problem.
Right.
I haven't been in the system, but you have, so maybe, you could chime in on this as well. But I feel like our system is set up to keep people failing,
Oh, for sure.
to keep people down, because there are for-profit prisons and there are reasons to keep people in prisons. What do you think? I could go on about this, but as someone who's been in the system, what's your view on that?
I think, well, so in Oregon, we don't have for-profit prisons, but we have sent people to for-profit prisons. We stopped doing that once we saw how hard, like just terribly the folks that were in prison were being treated. I think there's a component of that for sure. I mean, just because of how different every state is, but the recidivism is roughly the same as the national average, I would say that there's
Yeah.
maybe something more to it. And I think I really do think it's societal. I think there's a big
Yeah.
capitalist component, for poor people staying poor, feeding the machine, that kind of stuff. Without getting too into the weeds with that,
Yeah.
there's enough studies that show that you can track crime to poverty. There's a reason some neighborhoods are more heavily policed. There's a reason some folks end up getting sort of nickel and dime with time until they end up in prison. There's a reason that these things happen in more impoverished areas of our towns, and it's not just because they're poor, but they kind of go hand in hand. So what's the reason for that? What do we do about that? And how do we solve that? And that's where abolitists, prison abolitists kind of come in, where I sort of have a conflict with. I'm more of a prison reform approach kind of person. I have respect for folks in and that believe that we should just completely eradicate all prisons, I also feel like that's not
Yeah,
going to happen.
that's not an
It's just not
answer.
going to happen. It's not a
No,
reasonable approach. In the meantime,
no.
people still need change now. And one of the things that I see on their kind of plate with what happens, they forget the upstream component of all this. Like we can't just close prisons and then that'll fix poverty. We have to look at fixing poverty, look at fixing mental health issues, look at fixing why in society so many people end up addicted to drugs. So many people end up homeless. Like what is that? How do we get that? Then we can look at abolishing prisons. But currently there's just some really scary, dangerous, unfortunately terrible people in prisons. We're always going to need somewhere for them to go. That's just going to happen. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
I think what I did notice was, in Oregon, and we're not the only one that has a mandatory minimum, but in Oregon, when I went in at 19, our mandatory minimum was 5 or 6 years old. It's still pretty new. And the mandatory minimum, what that means is for certain violent offenses, you have either a 5 year 10 month sentence or a 7.5 year sentence that you can hand out. Doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter what their situation is. It doesn't matter how many times they've been to prison. Outside of very, very extreme circumstances, they can't make adjustments to that. When you go in, you have no good time. So you will do that amount of time no matter what. And completely obliterates any incentives to do anything other than what the prison system gears you towards. So if you're in a
And
prison where fighting is like how you survive, that's what you're going to do because what's it matter?
yeah, and that makes no sense to me. I mean,
None whatsoever.
somebody gets caught with something stupid, it's like you're going away for a minimum of 5 years, 10 months. Like
Yeah.
there I mean, there's teenagers going away for that.
I
And
was I
then
was on a bus with a 16-year-old kid that was getting 5 years and 10 months for assault too. And what that basically means is that the fight drew blood and he was on a playground and they racked all these charges up on him. And yeah, he shouldn't have been fighting, but to get 5 years and 10 months at 16, going to a men's prison, he was going to the same prison I was going. It's crazy.
yeah,
His prefrontal mine wasn't. My prefrontal cortex wasn't fully developed, but his certainly wasn't.
right.
Yeah, he's an underage minor kid, and the only reason why he was getting sent to that prison was because he had because of the sentence that he got, and because of how he had acted in the youth prisons. The youth prisons here are terrible. They they're constantly getting caught with adults performing sexual acts with the minors there, like they were terrible. So you know yeah, maybe he should have done better to not get sent to the men's prison. But having that even be a fucking option is just bonkers to me. And at
Yeah,
19, I
and
can see like this is not good. It's not good.
yeah, but still, I mean, our brains don't fully develop until we're 24.
Sure,
You've got a teenage kid who basically never had a chance.
no shit.
And instead of coming out of a youth prison and saying, "Okay, this happened, let's take a look at this," he's going to commit another crime because trauma, and then he's going to be sent to a men's prison where it's just going to get worse, and we're just perpetuating the problem.
Oh, he got scooped up right away by men grooming him for the gang. He got integrated
Oh,
very quickly, and I'm sure
wow.
like that was just his life after that. I mean, the only reason I escaped most of that was because I could draw really well, and people just left me alone. Like I was tall, so once I put some weight on, people just picked easier targets. But there was still a window where I was getting, people were trying to smooth talk me into joining their little gang, and um, if I hadn't found a pathway to drawing, it was probable that I would have had to choose one of those pathways. But luckily, I was able to, channel that into something else. Because like I said, I just didn't want to. I'm just a fucking nerd. Like I was just reading, Lord of the Rings and shit in my corner. Like I didn't want any, I didn't want any trouble. I wasn't, my event
Yeah.
happened, and I recognized that I deserved something for that, be it prison or whatever. But I was lucky that I just didn't feel like I was part of that lifestyle, and it wasn't forced on me because I had that layer of protection of being able to draw. Like I could draw someone with their mom, and that carried so much weight in there. But if I
Nice.
hadn't
So it's
discovered
almost
that,
like currency.
it was absolute currency, and it was safety because I would end up drawing shot callers with their parents, and they would have sort of a don't fuck with that guy because he's my artist kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
and it was all luck, really. I mean, I was just trying to keep myself busy, and the one of the cellmates I had was trying to get me into his gang, which I mean, this is how ridiculous it is. This kid was a white supremacist. He had all the SS stuff, and he was like all tatted up, and he was in a gang that was ran by a black guy. So there's like just this level of idiocy and all this stuff, all this politics and stuff that was in there.
Mm.
And I was
Wow.
like not interested in any of that. So thankfully, he saw my drawing and he's like, I can probably sell that for you. I'll split it with you if I can sell it. I was like, sure. I mean, I'm just drawing for fun. He sold it to somebody for $40 and I got 20, he got 20. And I was like, well, I could do that part of my own. So I just started kind of shopping my stuff around and just getting it out there. And then I started kind of making a name for myself with that. And then, like I said, once I put some weight on it, people just were like, there's smaller people in there. Um, but
Yeah.
that wasn't everybody's pathway. When you have people that are my age, and one of the officers even said, we had like this orientation when we all came in, and he even said he was noticing a disturbing trend in how young people were that were coming in. He's like, it was pretty typical that he would see people that were coming in with 2 or 3 years that were, you know, 28 and older. And then now he's like, it's at least almost 6 years, and it's all these 18 to 20 year olds, 18 to 25-year olds just flooding the system. And they're here for years. And, when the staff is noticing that, the staff is like, this isn't good. That's pretty telling. And I think that's the part where, the original question is, do I think that there's some sort of a component of like wanting to keep people locked up? I don't know that it's exactly that. I just think that there's this fear mongering around any kind of adjustments being made to any of this stuff, because when they get it wrong and one person acts out and does something terrible, then it makes it back to we're all bad, the same kind of bad. We're on the same level of bad. In Oregon, anytime we talk about doing something with Measure 11, which is
Which
that
is
mandatory, that day for day mandatory sentencing
okay.
guideline, anytime we talk about making a change to that, they bring up this kid, Kip Tinkle. And years ago, he killed his parents and then opened fire at a school in Springfield, Oregon. And
Oh, wow.
they bring him up as if this this terrible event and person will get the same treatment as everybody else if we make any kind of like reform on this. So if we make it easier for some people to get like a second look or to get good time or to have like, an attempt at like changing their sentencing so that they're not being just beat with this one type of sentence, they bring this one guy up. It's like, well, he's going to get out of prison. We can't do that. So, and it works every time. Whereas realistically, he's not getting pardoned. Like he's not done anything in there to show rehabilitation. His crime is horrendous, but they just
Yeah.
they just use that extreme, and um anytime, so they have made changes, thankfully, um but it was like, this happened, the original measure for that mandatory minimum happened in 1995. We didn't see any changes start being made until like 2015. So we had all this data to show how terrible this is. Like recidivism's gone up. It's not helping with crime rates. Nothing. It's just no benefit to this except we're now paying for people to be in prison for longer. Most of the time, youths who could benefit from some sort of other kind of socializing programming. We had all this data. It was still this constant pushback of no, no, thank you. And it's odd because we look at Oregon as Portland, right, and maybe Eugene, of this very progressive state, but for the most part, we're not when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a clear example. And again, that's not to say that like everybody is just this innocent butterfly in there. When I was doing the prison inreach stuff and I was going back into the prison and I was working with guys there, we would have these really well-meaning, suburbanites coming in there and like just, rosy colored glasses, everybody's wonderful. And I would have to keep reminding them, like, some of these guys will try to take advantage of you. Some of them are going to try to get money from you. Some of them are going to try to, get you to start talking to them sexually. Some of them are going to try to, they're going to try to take you. You got to be careful. And sometimes it was like you'd have to drill it down and it would still happen. They would still start, they would slip someone their address or something, and that person would start writing them, and then it would turn into this whole thing because that's that part of harm reduction where it's like you have to take all of it and or nothing. where I disagree. Like, I think there's still nuance, there's still like a component of this where you have to look at people as a whole person and recognize, just because we agree that the system's broken and that like this whole thing is falling apart, like we're not doing a good job of rehabilitating people, doesn't mean that this person's innocent because they're in prison. And
Mhm.
I still kind of see that. I was working for this organization where, on one hand, it was a group of feminists, great, who very much advocated for like this change in like rape culture and how sexual assault's being treated and how violence against women's being treated and all these like different movements. But at the same time, when they dealt with people that were in prison for DV, it's like there was this cognitive dissonance where now suddenly that person is just this innocent creature because they're in prison. Somehow the system failed them and they're in prison, even though it's for this thing where they recognize that there's this matriarchal issue, right? Like there's this weird disconnect. And so they're super nice to these people who are a part of the thing that they're opposing on this other side. And it always baffled me to see that, because just because they cross this barrier of going to prison doesn't mean that component's removed, right? They're still in this cycle of looking at women a specific way, and they've done harm to people that you're supposedly protecting on the other side. And part of their advocacy was like making sure that they did time for these things, because it was sort of an unfair, some people would get like 6 months or slap on the wrist for doing these horrible offenses against women, and then they would go in, and then now suddenly, so they were like best friends with these people that they were just trying to advocate for stronger sentencing towards. So it's really weird kind of disconnect. And I would see this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. I would see this kind of, and I would see this kind of stuff regularly enough to where I started kind of taking a step back, because another instance I was working at, I used to have a kind of a little arts and crafts thing for Etsy. And so I joined a makerspace, and a makerspace is just a big warehouse where you pay a
Hmm.
subscription and you have like your little booth that you can make stuff, and you have all these tools that you communally share. It was started by a guy who'd done time. And so I had an opportunity to get to know him, and part of their program that they had started up was getting artwork out of the prison to put on the walls there, which I thought was great. I had the opportunity of having my artwork on walls. That was, I still can feel exactly what that felt like, pride-wise. Like my work was on a wall. My work made it into a newspaper. I don't have the clipping anymore, but it's such an amazing feeling, and I was
Yeah.
excited to be part of that. So I started, part of it was like just getting a letter, and then having that back and forth, sort of explaining them what the process looks like. I was like, great, I'd love to, write some of these folks and see what I could do to help. The first letter they gave me was from a guy. First thing I did was look him up. Like, what I punched his SID number in, which is our state ID number for convicted people. Um, First thing that came back was child endangerment, child sexual endangerment, all these things that look like they were related to using children for some sort of film or photo thing, right? So creating child porn. And I was like, absolutely
Yeah.
not. And I went back and I was like, I can't write to this person. I can't imagine anybody should be writing to this person. And it was like,
Yeah.
they looked at me like I was an alien. They were like, we don't really vet these people. And I was like, you absolutely should. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean you're not vetting these people? Like, there should be a clear cutoff of like, oh, okay, using kids for porn is fucking bad on a level where I'm not going to support them bringing their artwork out. That's not the kind of
Yeah.
communal support I'm trying to look for. Whereas, someone gets beat up on the street because they're a part of a gang, like, yeah, there's a chance for that dude, even if it's like malicious in a narcissistic way, maybe there's a chance for that dude. But this idea that they're all they're all the same good or all the same bad is crazy. That's
No.
just doesn't
Yeah.
work for me.
No.
So I ended up having to step back from that. They were looking at me like I was crazy, and I was like, I've done time with people like this. You don't want to be writing them. As a woman, you shouldn't be writing them. But as anybody with kids, you shouldn't be writing them. Like, nobody should be writing this person and like trying to get their artwork. And I asked, I was like, well, what if you're writing a serial killer and you don't know it? Are you now at the point to where like that's all right? They were just harmed by the system. I mean, maybe, but come on now, like, so was I, and I've never thought about driving up and down the I-5 corridor, raping and killing women. Like, I've never thought about that as
Yeah.
part of my. I just had some really bad days, and I did a really bad crime while I was blacked out. I mean, I'm not in the same, we're not the same good here.
Yeah.
there's just not that level. So
Yeah.
it's so
Drunk and disorderly is vastly different than murdering several people.
right. And we shouldn't be putting our work on walls. Like it just, there's a perversion there already with people like celebrating serial killer art and like getting merch from them and stuff. One of the
Oh
guys
yeah.
in there, Randy Woods, or no, the Happy Face killer, he would charge people money to get his photo taken with him, and he would sign with his
Hmm.
little trademark smiley face. Like I'm not going to be a part of that. Which him sending me a drawing like that would be on the same level. I'm not gonna write him letters. It's not gonna.
Yeah. Well, there are those people out there that, especially women, you know, I mean, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, he
Oh
was
yeah,
married in prison. Ted Bundy. I mean, there are women who write these serial killers, and it's like, okay, what happened to you that this is, something that you feel like you need to
right,
do? And
right.
it's so sad. I don't know if you've ever seen this show, Love After Lockup, but it's about women, or it's about people who write inmates
Yeah,
and start relationships with them after they get out of prison, and they try to change them, and it's like, but
yeah,
this person hasn't been reintroduced to society in years, and you're out here thinking you're just going to change their ways and they're just going to be perfect when they come out. And no, there has to be some sort of process to this.
yeah. And they're not ready to like be on the same. I've seen a couple of those. There was my Facebook algorithm started feeding me some of these clips, and there was one. It was
Gotta love
actually
Facebook algorithm.
right. There was one locally. Actually, there was a couple that was local, and they were both
Yeah.
a mess. But the big thing that I noticed was like the partners who were with these people coming out were not ready for fully what they're signing up for, even if they're doing well. Getting an apartment's going to be hard. Like I said, getting work can be hard. There's going to be integration issues. There's going to be all this stuff that needs to be learned. Like you said, being integrated into society that, great for partners that are able to do that. But there's, there's impact to them, even if that person's doing everything correctly. That I think just people are not, not prepared. I mean, my ex left me for that reason. We were together for almost 2 years just recently, but I was having a hard time finding work. Even though it's been so long, my charge was pretty severe. So it's really difficult to get certain work. And the big impact was that the work I was trained to do, there was a certain background check that I'm not able to pass. And that was impacting me. But she was looking at it from like this future part of, if we're living together and for some reason I lose my job. I lost my last one because of budget changes. So it's not like I was fired for conduct, but that could still happen. How long is it going to be before I find work again? And then is she going to have to support me during that? And then, you know,
Yeah.
she would have to buy a house if we were going to live together because it's just challenging for me to get an apartment. And so all that started really weighing on her. And, it sucks that we broke up over that, but I also see it as just this bigger part, right? Like there's no, I don't get a certificate that I did it, that I passed, right? I don't get a piece of paper. There's no amount of work that I can do outside of a pardon where I can say, okay, it's been 25 years. There's been absolutely no violence in my history since then. There's been no other police contact outside of positive or, work related. I got a speeding ticket once, I guess, so that maybe that counts. There's been no other instances. There's no process for me to say I did it. Can I just be a part of things now?
Yeah.
And having this be affecting things so late in the game. And I see it regularly with people that I was working with. They were like stuck in that same place of like, I cannot get an apartment. I just can't get an apartment. We're told to
Yeah.
just live in these ghettos. We call them felony flats here. We have a couple. Um, Pay cash. Maybe get kicked out because of whatever reason, and because it's all cash, you have no recourse. So we don't have rights anymore as citizens, I guess. Like it's just and then of course, if you are trying to do well and you're living with people that aren't, like that's unreasonable too. Just having them like all congregated into one area, just I don't see how that's
Yeah.
helpful. Um, but right,
So there really isn't, I mean, for someone who wants to, who like you, who's come out and says, okay, I want to change my life. I don't ever want to go back. But you're constantly struck with these roadblocks, like can't get an apartment, can't get a job,
yeah,
can't, I mean, relationships are difficult. Like, where is the incentive other than I don't want to go back and deal with that? I feel like there should be a point where some of these crimes that are on record should be somewhat like, okay, this, like a statute of limitations almost. It's been 25 years for you. You haven't done anything wrong in the interim, but yet you're still being stigmatized against. That sucks.
So there is, to some degree, for some of the there's expungement processes. There's a set aside process. Oregon released something called the SB 819, which was a process for you to have, after a certain amount of time, have your case relooked at. But there were so many applicants that after 6 months they shut that down. There were so many people trying to apply for it that they just stopped even looking, even for a pardon. Which the process of a pardon is that you can show real rehabilitation, and then that would offer an opportunity for clemency on that, so that you could just re-enter society as you are. The problem with that is, my governor, before the one that we currently have, um, looked at 20 cases, approved one, and 240 of them they didn't even open. And so that's not a pathway. That's a lottery.
Yeah.
That's not even reasonable. For the SB 819, they were approving like one a year, and they had hundreds, because they shouldn't have the staff to look through it all. So, if you're not able to get an expungement, I understand it was, for me, it was a violent offense, and that carries some weight. But like you said, it's been 25 years.
And you were a
I fucking
teenager.
dress up and go to Comic-Con. I don't get into fights. I'm not out there running around being a weirdo. Like, I just, I play video games. I just want to, there's dating groups I can't even join. There's a singles meetup group here that specifically says no violent offenses, no matter how long. So I can't even meet somebody through that
Yeah,
avenue, and I get it from their
that's
perspective. They're trying to be
terrible.
protective, but like, if we're supposed to be making sure people don't go back to prison, then what are we doing? Like, but we're just in this cycle of just churning out more violence. If a lot of the times, what I've experienced, what I've learned, is it's the fact that I went to prison, not necessarily the fact of the event, because the prison
Yeah.
part means something more than just the event. There's people that have gotten into fistfights that go about every day and nothing happens to them. But those fistfights could carry prison time with how our sentencing guideline is set out. If you get into a fight
Yeah.
with somebody in a bar and you draw blood, that's assault too. That could be assault too, and that's 5 years and 10 months in prison. But because for some reason they didn't go to prison, they did the same thing, there's this difference in how we approach them and how we treat them. I did time with a guy who that's exactly what happened. He got into a prison fight. I mean, he got into a bar fight, and it wasn't even much. He was an older guy. They were just drunk, and they like did this clumsy, like, throw hands thing. I got to read his paperwork. Like, guy, and it was
Yeah.
his friend. Like, they just were drunk guys, so they just fight sometimes. The guy
Yeah.
slipped and fell and hit his head, and they called that an assault one, and that was that. He's doing 90 months, and
Wow.
taken out of his home, taken out of his family's care. He can never, probably never have no guns, no nothing ever again. Can't vote in the primaries. Like, he can't, like, forever, right? So I mean, unless he gets a partner, I guess, if he can get lucky enough to be a part of that lottery. Um, and it's like, does that make any sense? That doesn't make any sense. And
No.
it's not even the event. Again, people hear that event, they're like, oh man, that sucks, dude. I'm sorry you lost your friend. Like, they're looking at it like, just a simple act. It wasn't like he's out there beating people up on a regular or something. He's not a gangbanger on
Yeah.
the corner or something. Not that they don't deserve
Right.
some sort of attempt at rehabilitation, but just the disparity between them. Again, you're either all bad at the same level or you're all good at the same level, and that's it's creating
That's
some
not
real
fair.
conflicts. Yeah, it's creating some real conflicts. And I've had the opportunity to, like I said, I've gone back into the prison. I've earned my way back into certain parts of life. And so I see that it's possible. Like, some of the stigma is changing, which is part of why I am so public about it. It doesn't help my
Yeah.
cause. Like, it's making it harder for me to meet people and be friends with people. But I also want people to, nobody that I've ever met, ever, since I've been out of prison, has ever guessed that I did time. Not a single one of them. When I tell them that I went to
Yeah.
prison, they're baffled. They're like, that can't possibly be the case. That's
Yeah.
my goal. Like I can show people, I have prison looking tattoos, but I got those after because I thought I was going to be a tattoo artist. Like there's no, and I'm not this special case. I have been in contact and I'm still friends with people that have had the same path as me, that are doing the same things. They're still being hindered in some ways by this. And they've built a life where, things are going well for them. But if it all came down to it, they would still just be another convict or another inmate or another person who did all this stuff. And
Yeah.
there has to be a balance there. We have to be able to look at people through the same, like the same lens that they're whole people, but also just take into account that they're going to get out someday, and they're going to be your neighbor, whether you like it or not. And they're going to be the person helping you across the counter. They're going to be the person fixing your car. They're going to be the person doing these things. And do we want them to be our neighbor or our enemy? Like, not that we should make them our friend, but if, if anybody watching or listening to this really thought about how, if you thought everybody around you just is expecting you to fail in this catastrophic way, that carries a weight inside you where if things go catastrophically bad, the thoughts start to come in like, why? Fuck it, I'll just go back to prison. Like
Yeah.
why even try? If I can't even
Yeah.
be a part of things, why even, and forever? I think even
Yeah.
after I get my pardon, if I talk about my prison time, there's still going to be that, well, I don't want you next to me. I don't want you, helping me out. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know what to do with that. Like I know that I've seen when we are working with guys and we're giving them the tools to change their culture before they get out of prison, the majority of them take that with them. They're not always successful. Sometimes they go back, but when they do, they've still carried this like change of pace of, being separate from that culture. And eventually it sticks in some way. So I've
Yeah.
seen that we can have this capacity to do that. And I've seen them work side by side with people in their community and how much that makes a huge difference in how successful they are. And I've seen the other side of it where if that's completely removed, then nobody has any incentive to stay out of prison. And we've created a situation where now they feel more comfortable in there. Um, that's the person that's going to steal your shit where you're not looking. That's the person that's going to rob you for your car. That's the person that's going to, try to do harm to you. And we built that. We guaranteed that, because we didn't provide any pathway. Um, so it's yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to figure out.
Yeah. Well, people they hear criminal, they hear prison, and they automatically, it's like, bam, you're a horrible human being. You've done bad things. You've been part of the system, and you're just inherently evil. So I think it needs to start like this: awareness. Not everybody who has been to prison or jail is awful. People make mistakes. And like where you're at, there's mandatory minimums. So beating someone up and having them slip and fall and hit their head, it's not caused by you, but there's still this mandatory minimum that goes with it.
Yeah,
And no one is taking any of that into account. So I think it just becomes this fact of awareness. Like not everyone is bad. People actually learn from their mistakes, which I think is another misconception that people don't realize because they do see the rate of recidivism is so high. So they think, well, they're a prison rat. They're always going to be a prison rat. It's not true.
yeah,
Like you're one of the nicest guys I've ever met.
yeah, yeah,
I have no doubt that you wouldn't hurt anyone. But the fact that you're facing this because of what you did when you were 19, like, come on,
yeah,
people. Let's just start accepting people and hearing their stories before we start judging. And
yeah,
that's actually why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm so glad that you're here, because I don't want people to judge you for what you did when you were 19 and you've learned from it. It's
yeah,
so crazy to me that we are still under this umbrella of judgment.
yeah. It's like the same level of judgment that it's so interesting the types of things that are barred from access. Like I can't drive for DoorDash. I can't deliver people's DoorDash stuff because of what's on my record, but I can drive clients that are recovering from drugs and alcohol to their appointments. And that didn't weigh anything towards me being able to drive for DoorDash. Even when I'm proving it, even when I have the capacity to prove it, like, oh, I did this job that's like significantly more emotionally harmful and could carry more potential for violence.
Yeah.
Something like DoorDash is still like, no, thank you. We're scared you're gonna beat people up when you deliver your burger, I guess. There's no
Yeah.
and it does, I mean, it does come from that protective sense. It's it just that bigger cycle of you did something wrong, we put you in prison, we're now scared of you because you went to prison. You're always gonna be that no matter what, and our best bet is to just keep you separate. Even though the stuff that probably got you to go to prison is because you felt separate, we're just going to sort of double down on that. The only people you can hang out with now are people that have also done time. And hopefully you find some that did good. And if you didn't, well, we'll see you soon when we give you a new sentence and we put you back in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you do the global sort of zoom out and you recognize that we're one of the only developed countries that are doing this to people, other countries are getting it right and they keep finding ways to lower the recidivism. It just comes back to like, what are we doing wrong? And why are we still stuck in that loop? And why does it seem like any attempt to get out of that loop is met with so much resistance? You know, there's
Yeah.
there's never going to be change if we're just constantly looking at ways to make it more difficult for people to exist. We keep removing healthcare
Yeah.
opportunities. We keep removing access to mental health care. We keep making it very clear that if you do drugs, you're suddenly inhuman. And, you look at how we're treating our most vulnerable people, and then we're all surprised that like they end up in jail and prison. And then now they're a part of a system that has a high recidivism. Millions and
Yeah.
millions of people who have this record, but they're all treated as the same. Um, it's baffling, and it can be really discouraging. I won't lie, there's been a couple times where things got real bad for me, and I was like, I know the score in prison. I didn't act on that. It wasn't like I didn't want to do harm, but I was like, I mean, if there's a way to sign up for it for a couple years, I'm on board. Like, let me just get a break because at least I know, I just know what to expect. I don't have to. There's no level of disappointment finding out that this person I really like is now suddenly never going to talk to me again because they found out I did time. Like, there's not this
Yeah.
this worry that if I lose my living situation here, then I'm not going to be able to find any apartment. I'm not going to be able to find a place to live.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's prison. I don't want to fucking go back there. But that
Right. Yeah. No.
still,
But how do you cope with that? I mean, what do you do for yourself that helps you get over those moments where you're like, fuck this, I should just go back because at least I'll have a roof over my head and I won't have to worry about finding a job and I won't be judged. I'll be in the structured environment where I could just be me.
I think more for my case, it speaks to like the level of work I've done with my mental health. I have had a lot of success with the kinds of mental health stuff I've overcome. And part of that is just kind of, well, it's an advocacy thing, actually. It's just accepting the world as it is and recognizing that changes need to be made. Me doing something to go back to prison is not going to help literally anything. And it's just going to make everything worse
Yeah.
despite the what, and then looking at the core of it, like what am I actually asking for? Well, I'm asking for avoidance from all this stuff that's really hard. Like, it's easy there, I can do that. And that doesn't have anything to do with like being um what do I call it, institutionalized or anything, because I'm so far removed from that situation now. But more just like, well, if this is just going to keep happening, at least I know it's easier. And then recognizing, well, then what I'm really doing is I'm avoiding the challenges. And I can't overcome all these challenges, but I can come on a podcast and I can talk about my experiences. I can
Yeah.
volunteer and I can talk to some folks that are homeless, and hopefully maybe something I say or do or treat, just treating them like a human, maybe that's enough that they get off the streets, or carry that with them towards getting out the streets. I can go back into the prison. I can talk to guys in there and just let them know like, hey man, it's still hard out here, but it's getting easier. I have a value there. If there's evidence, I have a lot of evidence that I hold up. Well, so I
Yeah.
guess if anybody's on this side where they're in my position, but they're not sure what to do with themselves, that's what I would say. Service. Be a service to your community, even though it's hard. Be a service to your people, even though volunteer, sign up for work where you're putting back into the community as much as possible. That definitely, those worlds of just providing that kind of service are usually pretty accepting and they usually are pretty understanding of the situation. So you can feel a little human going and doing that stuff.
And that's important, you know,
It is,
to
yeah.
feel like you're doing something to help, like pay it forward.
Pay forward or just a part of, or just saying, hey, I just want to help. I just want to do something valuable with the things I've learned. Um, and so it creates a currency for me, sure. Like knowing that I've done time and that I've made progress with my mental health stuff and have removed myself from that culture and that society means that I could be of value for working with youth. I'd love to work with youth. I can't, but on a volunteer level, I think there's still opportunities for that, the chance to do that. I could go back into the prison. Like there's all this stuff that I can still do. And even even though at times like there's that little tickle of, well, it was easier in prison. That's just this romanticized version of it. It was not easy. Like it was terrible.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there was nothing great about it. The experiences I had of growth and meeting these wonderful people, that all exists out here. And it exists in a much more robust way without all of the parts of prison to go with it. And I know I'm not the only one who's done time, who's had hardships, who's thought, I'll just go back. I know that. I mean, we look at that, we see it with the recidivism numbers, but the goal of this remains to keep pushing forward. And I'm glad I did because I'm in a much healthier, happier place. I got the job I was telling you about. They only look back
Yeah.
7 years, so there's still work out there to be had. Like this is one of the biggest companies in America right now. Like they didn't have this like exceptionary clause in there. I told everybody, and because I didn't want to waste anybody's time, and they were so impressed with like my interviewing and how I talked to them that they were willing to just put it through anyways. And so that stuff's out there too. And I think that was really helpful to be able to find a company that could do that. And I think that
Yeah.
would be an encouraging thing for others too. Just keep at it. That company is the way it is because other people have shown up, done the work, and shown progress. So anytime we have an opportunity, people who've done time who are trying their best to just, be a part of society, anytime we have an opportunity to kind of show the proof of that, we should take it, even if we're not getting a direct reward,
Yeah.
because it does help with that stigma, just
Yeah.
just show up, do the work, and be the best you can. And even if that means you're struggling, be honest about your struggles and look for community support. Don't take it out on other people. Don't act on the ideas that prison's better, like obviously, but that makes a big difference, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story
Yeah, I appreciate
and
you having me.
sharing all this information. What does the future lie? What does the future have in store for Josh?
I'm writing a book. It's a fantasy
Mhm.
novel. I'm pretty deep into it. I'm really enjoying that process. I am working on my finances and just trying to get things back on track. My 6 month little hiatus from work kind of put me, started from scratch on some of that. So just focusing on that
Yeah.
and focusing on, what my next opportunities for volunteering and helping folks looks like. I'm doing some volunteer work for Thanksgiving. So looking for where I can put that energy. Once I have my finances back on track, probably look for something a little bit more permanent. Considering buying a home to. I found this land trust thing. Nonprofits that have these land trusts where they own the land, but you buy the house and you don't make a ton of money
Mhm.
from owning them, but it's like half the cost of a normal house. So I'm considering looking into that. You can get a house with $500 down. Like it's really an easy pathway
Oh,
for
wow.
folks to get in there. So I'm that I feel emboldened by that and just yeah, just looking at what the next opportunity looks like.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about restarting
Well,
my podcast, like now after doing this, so maybe that's on the table.
yes. I check out his podcast, you guys. I'll put the link in the show notes. It's really good. Like I listened to a couple of episodes
Oh,
and
thank you.
I can appreciate the topic. I'm not going to tell what it is. They're going to have to go and find it.
Yeah, engage in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Element of mystery here.
yeah,
Go look
yeah,
for his podcast.
absolutely.
But well, I think you're doing amazing work
So are
and
you. Thank you.
thank you
Yeah,
and good luck. And I wish you all the best.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us on Fine, I'll Talk About It. If today's episode got you thinking, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you want more real talk, more perspective shifts, and more finally someone said it moments, leave a quick review. It helps other people find the show. You can connect with me on Instagram at Inspired Action Wellness or my website, inspiredactionwellness.com, for more conversations like this. We'll see you in the next episode.